By the early 1800s, America was no longer finding itself. It was becoming something powerful, expanding, growing, moving outward in every direction. But growth doesn't always bring unity, because as the map filled in, something else began to take shape. Division, not over land, but over identity, over economy, over way of life, over what this nation was and what it would become. And just like before, dogs were there, not on one side or the other, but alongside people as the country began to tear itself apart.
After 1820, the pace didn't slow, it increased. New states continued to enter the Union. The frontier kept pushing west. Settlements turned into towns. Towns turned into cities. But the country wasn't growing in one direction. It was growing in two. In the north, industry began to rise. Factories, railroads, urban centers, a different kind of life. Structured, mechanical, expanding upward as much as outward. In the south, the land remained the focus. Agriculture, plantations, open space, a way of life tied to the land itself. Two systems, two economies, two identities, and with them, two very different daily lives. Dogs reflected that shift. In the north, they were adapting to closer quarters. Terriers, small, quick, and relentless, used to control rats in growing cities and factories. Dogs that would later shape breeds, like the Boston Terrier, began to emerge from these urban environments. Still working, still useful, but now part of tighter, more structured spaces. In the South, dogs remained tied to the land. Hounds, built for scent and endurance, tracking game across miles. The continuation of lines that would become the American foxhound and later coonhounds. And alongside them, stronger, more imposing dogs used for guarding property and control. Dogs bred not just for hunting, but for authority, for presence, for enforcement. As the country divided, so did the roles of the dog. And while breeds were beginning to take shape, names still told the simpler story. Names called across fields or shouted down alleyways. Jack, Rex, Duke, Brutus, Sam, Molly, Sally, Lucy, Rose, Belle. Not formal, not recorded for history, but lived, spoken, parts of everyday life. Because dogs didn't shape the nation, they reflected it. And as America pulled in two directions, they went with it. By the time the nation moved toward war, the dog was no longer just present. It was embedded in daily life. But that life was not the same everywhere. For most dogs, food was still simple. They ate what the household had: table scraps, bones, leftover meat, cornmeal. On farms and plantations, they might supplement that by hunting, small game, whatever they could catch. There was no commercial dog food, no measured portions. A dog ate what was available, and sometimes that wasn't much. Where a dog slept depended on where it lived. In rural areas, most dogs still lived outside. Porches, yards, barns. They stayed close to the home, but not always inside it, especially working dogs. But that was beginning to change. In towns and growing cities, some dogs were coming indoors, sleeping near the hearth. on rugs, at the foot of the bed. Not everywhere, not all at once, but enough to mark a shift. The dog was moving closer to the family. Veterinary care, as we know it, didn't exist. Not yet. There were no clinics, no standardized treatments. If a dog was injured, care came from the owner or from general animal knowledge used for horses and livestock. Basic wound care, crude treatments, guesswork, and sometimes surgery. Without anesthesia as we understand it today, without sterilization. Survival depended on resilience and luck. Even collars were still practical. Leather, handmade, often simple straps with a buckle. Some might have a nameplate, but many did not. Identification wasn't standardized. A dog was known because people recognized it. Leashes existed, but they weren't common in daily life. Dogs weren't walked the way we think of today. They followed, they stayed close, or they roamed. And that roaming was beginning to create problems, because as towns grew, so did concern about control, about safety, about disease. Rabies was still feared, just as it had been in colonial times, and now more people meant more risk. So laws began to appear. Dogs running loose, dogs considered dangerous, dogs without clear ownership, regulated, fined, restricted, sometimes destroyed. The pattern was repeating. Freedom, then control. Movement, then regulation. But through all of it, the dog remained where it had always been, at the edge of the home or just inside it, eating what was given, sleeping where it could, working when needed, not separate from human life, but woven into it. In 1861, the divide broke, not in words, not in policy, but in war. North against South, brother against brother, and everything that had once been daily life was disrupted. Homes emptied, fields abandoned, cities strained, but the dogs remained. They didn't choose sides, but they followed the people who did. In Union camps and Confederate camps, dogs were there, not as soldiers, but as something just as important. They guarded camp at night, alerting the movement before a man could see it. They followed columns of marching soldiers, keeping pace mile after mile. They lived among tents, smoke, and noise, adapting to a life that was constantly moving. Some became mascots, adopted by regiments, given names, fed when food could be spared, a piece of familiarity in a world that no longer felt familiar at all. Others stayed close to the edges, camp followers, unclaimed, moving between men, wagons, and supply lines, still surviving, still adapting. On the battlefield, they were there too, not in formation, but present. Amid the chaos, the noise, the confusion, dogs moved through a world that had been broken down completely. And when the fighting stopped, they stayed, with the wounded, with the dying, with the dead, because they didn't understand the war. They understood the human, and that didn't change. In a time when the country was tearing itself apart, dogs became something else, not just workers, not just guards, but anchors, a reminder of something steady in a world that was anything but. because even in war, they stayed close.
When the war ended, the nation was still standing, but it wasn't the same. Cities had grown, land had been fought over, families had been divided, and in many cases, lost. But the United States had survived. It had been reshaped, but through all of it, dogs had been there, on farms, in cities, and in camps, and in battlefields, not choosing sides, not understanding the conflict, but staying with the people who did, adapting just as the way they always had. Because no matter how much the country changed, that bond with the dogs remained. It couldn't break, because as this nation fought to hold itself together, we never did it alone. Because then, as now, we were a pack. In next week's episode, we explore a heartbreaking story of one camp dog by the delightful name of Sally Ann Jarrett. Some may know her by her image in stone at Gettysburg Battlefield.
This is America 250, The Dogs. This has been Episode 6.